Hey Danny, how are you? Yeah, quite a week to be in Boston for sure. Woolwich, Maine. I'm not in Maine right now. I've skipped town for a couple of days because I'm doing an event tonight, which is why my hair is wet. Atlanta and Baltimore. Hey everybody, how are you? Riverside, California, Mesa, Arizona. Yeah, it is a cheery shirt. I love tie-dye. My niece and nephew make these for me. Um, and like I say, I got to dry my hair for this event tonight, so I figured I'd just give it a try to cheer everybody up. All right, so you got about 1,000 people here, so it's probably worth starting in. Uh, so things are a lot different this week than they were last week, of course, and I want to lay out what happened in the election and what we can expect going forward. And I want you to remember, first of all, that everything is very much in flux. So the first thing to remember and to have, front and center, put it in a post-it note somewhere, is that for all that Trump and his loyalists are saying he has a mandate and that he won in a landslide, that is not true. It looks at the end of the day as if his majority is going to be less than a percentage point. It's the lowest number of people. It's the least amount by which somebody has won the popular vote since at least 1968. And it does not mean that all of a sudden there has been a huge change in the American electorate or in the way people think about things or anything. It simply means that the way the cards fell last Tuesday, Donald Trump is in line to be the next president of the United States. Now, people have asked how and why that happened, and I think there are of course, we're going to wait and we're going to see what the numbers look like because that's the only way you can really see who was voting. But one of the things that I would like to point out is that since the 2021 election, there have been a number of voter suppression laws put in place across the country, and those should not be discounted. I mean, nobody has factored in yet how big a difference they made. Usually, when you see historically a big drop off in voting, it's because there have been new laws that went in place. We don't know, but I think that's something that you need to look at. The other thing that I'm going to talk about in just a minute is how the political landscape has changed. And but the one thing I want to say, in addition to the idea that Trump did not win by a landslide, is you really must look at the down ballot races, because in the down ballot races, the causes that are being called progressive, but that I would call, honestly, I'd call conservative, but at least they're centrist ideas, passed. So a number of states protected the right to abortion in their state constitutions. I think it was 8, although I don't remember off the top of my head. Florida tried to, but it only had 57%, and the Republicans in Florida have adjusted their system so that you need to have 60% to get anything added to the Constitution. That's quite a lot. It's hard to get 60% for anything. So the people enshrined in their laws higher minimum wages, all sorts of things that would be considered progressive in this era, but as I say, are to the right of Dwight Eisenhower, who was a Republican president in the 1950s. So the point of this election remains the way it has always been, that the American people would like a government that responds to its interests. They want abortion rights protected. They want common sense gun safety legislation. They want higher minimum wages. They want government regulation. They want higher taxes on higher earners. They want the programs that the Democrats are putting in place, and they are voting for them in the states. Where they are not voting for them is at the top of the ticket. And that, I think, says something very important about where we are in this moment. There, in a lot of ways. But first of all, there was an extraordinary amount of disinformation around this election. And not only the kind of disinformation that I've talked about before, but as people said who were watching the way the news media was working, it is possible to believe that you are an informed American citizen and not have any idea of what is happening. So one of the things that came out after the election, actually came out a little bit before the election, but it really got traction after the election, was that people who were accurately informed about the economy, immigration, and abortion rights voted Democratic. People who were not voted Republican. And similarly, people who got their newspapers went 3-1 for Democrats. People who got their news from right-wing media went 2-1 for Trump. And that disinformation really, really mattered in this campaign, not least because apparently a lot of young men have been radicalized by YouTube, by Reddit. And where's the other place they get their news? YouTube, Reddit, and X, which of course Elon Musk bought. Now, that's a really important thing to think about, that disinformation and where it comes from, because while it is certainly part of the right-wing ecosystem in the United States and has been since talk radio in the 1980s, since it began in the mid 1980s, and everybody always talks about the fairness doctrine, and yes, the fairness doctrine did insist that in order to get a broadcast license, you had to present both sides of a story and you had to have fact-based argument. But they tend to forget that the fairness doctrine went out of effect at about the same time we got the rise of cable. And you actually don't, like, I don't need a broadcast license to do what I'm doing here. So bringing back the fairness doctrine in the incarnation in which it was in the 1980s is simply not going to help in an era of cable news and the era of people being able to broadcast on their own. So America has its homegrown disinformation for sure, and it always has, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But we have been flooded with disinformation from foreign actors as well since 2015. And the big actors in that are Russia, China, and Iran. And the reason that matters, aside from the fact it has affected our domestic politics, is that if there is one takeaway from this election, and I think there is this one for sure, the United States has just abdicated its role as a leader in world affairs. And that it is no longer going to protect democracies. It is no longer trying to protect human rights. We gave that up. And that is the beginning of a new era in global politics. And that, that's really heartbreaking. I mean, to me, anyway. I talked about this years ago when I talked about the isolationism of the radical right. And, is there an upside to it? And, my big thing is I don't know what the future is going to bring. That's sort of one of the curses of being human, right? We can't see what the future is going to do. But so I can't say what's going to happen, and I can't say what things look like going forward. But I said at the time, I liked the rules-based international order that the United States and primarily European countries, although others have been included in it after that, put into place after World War II. The idea that rather than simply taking smaller countries and injuring their populations inside your own countries, that countries have to live by international rules. I like rules. I'm an institutionalist. I think rules are very good. And I think that idea of leaching out of the international scene the possibilities for people simply to exert their efforts to take over another country have gone a lot toward reducing our dangers of having a world war. And we just walked away from that. And no country should ever, at least in our lifetimes, ever expect that we are going to be there because we have just proved that we will not. So that's going to change everything. That is the rules-based international order that has protected the world since 1945-ish, a little bit later for NATO, is now going to be replaced by different kinds of alliances. And it certainly looks as if the Trump administration is going to ally itself with autocracies around the world. And an autocracy is, the fact that people did not know what an autocracy was or authoritarianism was when Sarah Longwell of the Bulwark was doing focus groups, I found really shocking. But what that means is it's a form of government in which power is concentrated in the hands of one individual, sometimes spread out through a cabinet that can theoretically offer advice. But if one person's in charge, you tell that one person what they want to hear. And by the way, those people always go squirrely. They by definition, they always go squirrely because you cannot live your whole life with people saying, oh, yes, you're brilliant, without it meaning that you cease to make good decisions because you cease to to consider alternatives and to second guess yourself, which is a sign of a healthy mind, as opposed to a dictator who has been told, for way too many years that everything they do is brilliant. So the idea that we're going to align now with autocracies like Russia, like Hungary, that's a very big shift in world history, and it's, like I say, it might be good. We don't know what's going to happen. It might be that, the United States has not always used its power responsibly. And, many hundreds of thousands of people have been made refugees or been killed in American adventures overseas, like in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So maybe, this is a good thing for the world. I just didn't like to see it because, to me, that older system, flawed though it was, had provided the kinds of stability that had protected the world since World War II. That's over. I can't imagine why any country would ever again trust the United States to be there for it. But we'll see how things shake out going forward. And much though I would like to talk more about what things look like internationally right now, I think you're probably mostly interested in the way things are going to play out internally. So again, people like the policies of the middle going forward. And one of the things that, if we're talking about this election, one of the things that makes me just bonkers is after an event like this, everybody suddenly knows exactly what went wrong and they knew how they could fix it. And the answer, I would say, is that Harris and Walz ran a spectacular campaign. It was really a joy to watch it. And they had a problem from the beginning, and it was the problem that I identified back in the summer for you people, I think, that the reason that Biden and Harris had become a ticket was because they had separate constituencies. And the problem was that once you lost Biden, once he was off the ticket, Harris could try and rebuild those two constituencies by bringing on another white man who was younger than Biden, but there was no way you were going to kick her off the ticket, regardless of what she wanted, simply because if you did not move her up, you would lose her base constituency of people of color and women. And so there was no way not to have her at the top of the ticket and not lose that constituency. And yet, it looks pretty much as if the fact she was a woman at the top of the ticket did not help her case at all. And the problem is, if you hear people saying, oh, we should have had a primary and somebody else would have been up there and it would have been great, you are forgetting, if you think that the people of color and women who had supported Biden and Harris were not going to take that lying down. So, I think it was just a demographic problem there. And it really doesn't do us much good to say, I could have fixed things if only they had done X, because we don't know. And always remember that there is, it's very, very hard to do contingency going backward, because unless it's something truly obvious, like if only that person hadn't died, you've got a better shot, but you just don't know how things would have played out. Similarly, I am reading that the Democrats should back away from the policies that are being identified as having isolated certain voters, pushed certain voters away from the ticket, primarily the emphasis on LGBTQ plus rights. And the thing I would say about that is, one of the things that we will have to do better about going forward is making people understand that, first of all, rights are not a zero-sum game. If I give you rights, that does not mean I lose my own. And I just come back to Lincoln on this. The minute you start to say we all have rights and they don't, you've given up the game. You have made it clear that you are willing to admit a world in which some people are better than others. And then it's only a question of time until your group is defined as some of those others. So that's another place that I think it would be absolutely the wrong lesson for Democrats to take from this. The lesson that I am taking from the election is that we've got to do a better job combating disinformation. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about how that could be going forward. And again, the reason I say that is because if you look at people who were informed about reality voted for the Democrats. People who were fed a diet of lies voted for the Republicans. And that's, it's established in a whole bunch of different studies. And that seems to me to be a much bigger problem than, oh dear, should she have appeared on Joe Rogan, which is something somebody has been saying. All right, so let me say that. So having said that I think disinformation is at the heart of this election. Because again, it's very different at the very top of the ticket than down below. We had people who appeared out of the woodwork, voted at the top of the ticket, and then went back into the woodwork. Or at least so it appears. The numbers are still being crunched and all that. But there is a problem now, a very deep problem for the Republican Party. And, one of the things that I'm seeing everywhere is, oh my God, it's all over. We've become a dictatorship. And of course, I'm extraordinarily concerned about this, about Trump and his evacuation of the rule of law, the fact that he will now never answer to his, in the courts, to his law breaking or apparent law breaking, well, the state stuff, to his law breaking, and what that says about the rule of law in the United States. Those things are real and they are terrifying. But there's a saying that comes from Timothy Snyder, but it's not unique to him. It's anybody who deals with authoritarians. Do not obey in advance. So the people who are saying, oh my God, I can't speak up anymore. I can't do this. I'm frightened about this. You're telling the oppressors what they can do without a struggle. And that is a very good way, to teach them how to become oppressors. And that it's really important to recognize that has not yet happened. And we don't yet know what is going to happen. And we have agency to affect what is going to happen going forward, especially at the state and the local level. But so that being said, for all that Trump is talking about, he's won this huge, he says huge mandate, it's not a mandate, and that he's going to do all these big things. He's got some very, very big problems. The first of them is the one that was there before the election and is still there now. He is not okay mentally. He is slipping mentally. He is not in good mental shape. Okay, so why does that matter? That matters because, first of all, he's going to be very erratic, which is, that's actually not what I want to focus on. Think about this. And again, I'm always telling you, play the other side of the table. Think about this. If you are a Republican who wants to be reelected, who wants to have a career in politics, and regardless of what your politics are, unless you are an absolutely fervent Christian nationalist who believes God is doing everything, in which case you're kind of over there with God. But if you're one who is somehow hoping to continue to participate in the political system through the actual political system, your interest is in setting yourself up in such a way that you can stay in power, that you can be reelected, that you're not going to have, a whole bunch of people complaining about you all the time, regardless of what elections look like. And that's a little bit of a different subject that I may or may not get to. So what are you going to do? There's Trump. He's weak. He is mentally loopy. Who's next? Who's going to run his administration? Well, according to the voters, J.D. Vance is going to do that. The Ohio senator is going to do that. But nobody likes J.D. Vance. And J.D. Vance has about 18 months of experience in the Senate where he did nothing. So he has not spent a lot of time learning the ropes. He didn't know the ropes ahead of time. He clearly is a Christian nationalist. Again, he's somebody who doesn't really know how to make things work. Nobody likes him. If you are a Republican, are you going to want J.D. Vance to take over, knowing that he's backed by Peter Thiel, who is this tech bro, right? So maybe not, but then you've got another problem. Who's sitting at Trump's right hand doing all the work right now? Elon Musk. And Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. He essentially bought this presidency. And he is the one who is calling the shots right now for this incoming Trump administration. But there's some problems with that too. First of all, of course, he is not eligible to be president himself. And there is J.D. Vance. And he has a huge ego. And he's not very popular either. So if you are thinking about the next 4 years, it's a little hard not to imagine there's going to be extraordinary tension at the top of that party. What's that going to look like? And how is that going to play out? And you're going to see this playing out tomorrow over the election of a Senate Majority Leader, because Mitch McConnell is stepping away from that position, the leader from Kentucky, and who will replace him is unclear. Trump and Musk have made it very clear they want Rick Scott of Florida, and yet Rick Scott is not popular in the Senate, so among the Republicans or the Democrats, but among the Republicans, who are the ones who'll be voting. So does that put more give a better chance to somebody like John Thune of South Dakota, who is Mitch McConnell's pick? There's a lot of tensions around who is actually going to be controlling Congress, and that is going to matter for the passage of legislation. Because for all that there are a number of true believers in the House, for sure, where Trump commands a majority of the House Republicans, he has not in the past commanded the Senate Republicans. And for all that they might, what they really want is lower taxes and no regulation. That is still who they are. That's what they want. And while they want those things, they don't want a lot of what the MAGA Republicans are pushing. They don't want to crash the economy, because that would crash their portfolios too. They don't want the Christian nationalism that would force them to operate according to ideology rather than to the markets. So how that plays out is I think there's an awful lot of stuff in flux there. But if that's one of the problems they've got, the problem that he is old, and the problem that he is there really isn't somebody who can take over for him. And he's not going to be, at the rate he's going downhill, I don't expect him to still be functional in 4 years. And that may mean simply that somebody else starts to call the shots in the White House, or they might put him out on the 25th Amendment. Who knows? But he's not mentally healthy. All right. So if that's one of his problems, here's the other one. And this is the one that I think is, well, I was going to say fascinating, but it's also one where you people can put a lot of, you can make an effort, you can make a difference in the succession fight too, but you can make a lot of difference in this fight. And that's that in order to win, Trump and the MAGA Republicans and the disinformation campaigns essentially promised a whole lot of stuff to different constituencies that is mutually incompatible. Now, how do you square that circle going forward? And what I mean by that is that we know that about 65% of Americans want to protect abortion rights. And a number of people voted for Trump because he said he was going to make sure that abortion rights were protected in the states, right? You heard that all over the place. He said it himself repeatedly. And yet, as people like me pointed out, both the Republican platform and the Project 2025 call for a national abortion ban. And that's his real base. Those people are the ones who really turned out, I believe it's at 22%, to vote for him. And they did so at 87% of that 22% voted for Trump. How do you give them a national abortion ban and protect abortion rights? It is mutually incompatible. You cannot do that. So either they're going to have to kick it down the road, and just sort of never get to it, which they did in the first term with so many things, and their supporters simply didn't appear to notice that stuff didn't get done. Or they're going to have to make one of those constituencies very angry, which is a real problem going forward. Similarly, immigration. Trump ran to his neo-Nazi, if you will, base, his fascist base, by saying that he was going to deport up to 20 million undocumented Americans who had no matter how long they'd been here, no matter how integrated they were in the communities, right? However, a key constituency that he made great inroads to were Hispanic Americans. And those Hispanic Americans believed him when he said, I'm only going to deport criminals. Now, again, they didn't understand apparently that the MAGA Republicans have defined anybody who is undocumented as by definition a criminal because they broke the law by coming into this country. But you cannot both protect your Hispanic voters and deport them, mutually incompatible. And that is, aside from what the extraordinary deportation efforts that he's talking about would do to the economy. And one of the things that you're seeing, if you're watching the news, is a lot of threats from Trump's suggested director of ICE, the Customs Enforcement, that they're going to go after the Hispanic undocumented immigrants in urban Democratic dominated cities. Well, that's getting a lot of attention. I'm sure that's what they'll do. Why aren't they going to go into Florida and Texas first? The answer to that is because Florida and Texas's economies cannot survive without undocumented immigrants. They're just a huge portion of those economies. So they're not going to go in there first, at least, because that would destroy those states. So again, there's a tension there as well. Now, another one, tariffs. He has promised 10 to 20% tariffs on everything and up to 60, and he was, at the end of his campaign, he was saying up to 2,000, I don't care, percent tariffs on imported goods. And since the election, people are madly Googling tariffs, and they're realizing that those tariffs, if indeed he puts them in place as he has promised, are going to send prices through the roof. And they voted for him based on the idea he was going to lower prices. And just so you know, if prices actually lower in the United States, we're looking at a recession. Prices never come down. That's not a good thing when prices come down. What Biden and Harris did is they brought the rate of inflation from its high of a little under 9% down to what the Fed likes, which is about 2%. So it's already been saved. So maybe what Trump will say is he'll just say, there, look, costs haven't gone up since I became president. But he can't do that and put the tariffs on. Mutually incompatible. There is no way to put tariffs on goods coming from other countries and not have prices go up, because those higher tariffs get passed on to consumers. And this is something that people who voted for Trump are suddenly realizing, that they have voted to make things more expensive. Now, my guess is what we're going to see with tariffs is a lot of fudging. That he's going to, the idea of the tariffs on China are very clearly to protect Elon Musk's command of the electric vehicle market in the US, and also to have leverage for the electric vehicle market in China. But my guess is there's going to be a lot of fudging around the edges of what those different tariffs might look like. So again, those things are mutually incompatible. Similarly, Social Security, insurance, and Medicare and Medicaid, and food benefits, the SNAP benefits that are in the Farm Bill, which the Republicans didn't manage to pass in the last 2 years. And there too, the constituencies that supported Trump are the ones who use those federal programs disproportionately, largely because they tend to be older counties. It's at the county level that people look at. But in the food security legislation, because rural areas tend to use those more than urban areas do, tend to use food benefits more than urban areas do, which is interesting. But I think, those of us who come from rural states get that, right? Well, that's what we grew up with. So how do you both do what Elon Musk is promising to do and what the Republican MAGAs want to do, which is to cut those federal programs, and still keep your constituencies? And they're looking at a number of different ways to do that. One of them is to say simply that they will leave the systems in place as they are right now, but make them different for people who have not yet tapped into them, so that they aren't going to be aware that they're having stuff taken away. But there are other suggestions that they have made that would be devastating for those populations. So there's another place where two mutually incompatible promises are all going to be sitting there in the White House. And how on earth are you going to split those babies, except perhaps simply doing nothing? Or simply saying, well, I'm just going to make sure nobody can ever vote for me again, and therefore I will simply do whatever I want to do, whatever makes the most money for me. But this is the idea that he's just going to be able to start putting everything in place. Well, yeah, I mean, he's claiming the ability to do that, but what does that look like? What is he going to put in place? Now, again, I expect to see very early, very dramatic, very cruel and violent programs against undocumented immigrants. But for a full 20 million people, that's going to be very difficult to do. Not because he cares, but because it's really going to hurt a lot of economies for people who do care, like the governors of Texas and Florida. So there's a lot of reason to sort of take a deep breath and say, this is not as easy a plan as it looked when he would just promise everything to every different constituency. All right, so let me see what else I have. So here's some more things. One of the things to be aware of there now is that Trump is saying a lot of stuff. And you have to understand that every time he says he's appointing somebody to something, it's not really there yet. It's a trial balloon. He's trying a lot of stuff to see how it goes over. That's what he does. So, for example, he has floated the idea of Elise Stefanik, the representative from New York, to become the U.S. ambassador to the UN. Now, that's a really interesting appointment because it's kind of, excuse me, but it's kind of an FU in that she is now the third ranking Republican in the House of Representatives. That is a plum place to be when you've got a majority, at least in the Senate, you've got the White House, and it's unclear yet whether there'll be a majority in the House or not. But that's a really good spot. He's just pulled her out of that, or is saying he's going to pull her out of it. And somebody like me would think an appointment to become the ambassador to the UN would be like a crowning jewel. But for an administration that's made it clear it doesn't give two hoots in hell about the UN, that was a really kind of shiv in the back to give her that. So is she going to take it? Is she not going to take it? What does it mean? Has he, what message has he just sent? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that he's throwing out that is designed to look like he is rewarding MAGAs. That's, he's made all these suggestions, but those appointments are not necessarily workable. And similarly, there's a real problem with his transition team in that he has refused to sign the paperwork for his transition. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what that means, but I'm not sure you can do that. And still, I mean, there's something that I don't want to go any further with that sentence because I am not a lawyer, but there's a lot that people are frantic over right now, and frantic is the wrong way to be right now. The way to be right now is resolute in trying to shape the degree to which Trump feels he has the ability to run roughshod over the country. And this is a place really to make your voices heard by calling your representatives, by putting pressure on newspapers, by doing all the things we did before the election. But to say, for example, today he has floated the idea of an executive order that would create a panel of retired military that would decide whether or not they would keep current military officers on board. That's ridiculous. And the military should stand up against that. Now, especially if you are military, make your voices heard. Say, no, this is, I don't want the military being taken over by Donald Trump. This is not the way that my institution should be working. So now is a time really to bear down on that and not to sort of sit like a deer in the headlights and say, what are they going to do to me? But rather saying, listen, you work for me and please don't forget that. Or not even please, and don't forget that. So that's another thing to be aware of, is that he's really testing the waters. He does not have the command that he needs mentally to be able to do this in the thorough way that a younger, more mentally agile person would. Nor does he understand any of the systems, nor does he understand the idea of alternative locuses of power. So that's another thing to, to keep on, keep your eye on senators and representatives. who still might be willing to work to be reelected. Because, if there's a big enough outcry, that makes it hard for their lives, even if they feel like they never have to run for election again. So people asked me how to prepare for what's coming. And that's, in a way, an easy way. First of all, don't do it alone. I mean, the way that people fight back against the rise of authoritarianism is by creating communities, by making sure they have each other's backs, by speaking up, by not permitting things to happen. And I think that this is one of the ways we got to where we are, is that so many people didn't push back enough against the people who began spouting this hatred. And now is not the time to say, I'm just going to keep my head down, because that leaves those of us who are not keeping our heads down hugely at risk. So you found your communities before the election, stay with them. And that's not just about politics. That's about education and about food and about healthcare and about helping each other out. And that knitting of the bonds of community, not only locally, but also over the internet and all the different ways we can do things, is going to be really important going forward. So don't isolate yourself. The ideal member of an authoritarian community is somebody who's isolated. Everybody says that. You want to make sure that people are not isolated, that they don't feel alone, and that they feel like they can move forward together, sad though they might be. It also means that you'll protect the people within your communities who are vulnerable, and that's going to be really important. Now, that being said, it is key to, somebody just asked, is it possible that he will appoint enough people that he will change the makeup of the House and the Senate so that the Democrats get a majority? The House Republicans are already saying to him, cut it out. You're taking away our majority. Like I say, he doesn't really know how things work. So if he does that, he's further gone than I thought. And somebody will slap some sense into him and say, don't lose our majorities. You can put somebody else in there. And I think a lot of the appointments he is floating are just ways to make people feel good. I'm rewarding your Senate, your representative. I'm rewarding your governor. And then it may not happen. It's just, and that's actually, people have done that in the past. Not so much lately, but they have done it in the past. All right. So the other thing that is very interesting to me in this moment is that the real power of the people is devolving to the states. And that is a really good place to be using your muscle going forward. Certainly not to let the national stuff disappear, but as I say, in the states, people have been voting to put in place the kinds of policies that people like me care about. The protection of abortion rights, the minimum wages, the sorts of policies that people want. And key to that is going to be things like making sure that your states do not adopt voucher programs, which is a way for the national government or way for the governments, and that Trump says he's going to do for the national government, to gut public education. So, really use your muscle at the state level. And if you're in a state that is dominated by Democrats, those states are saying they will make a stand against Trump. And if you're in a Republican-dominated state, that will be harder. But worth remembering, again, that states like Missouri, which has had a Republican majority forever, I mean, like for more than over a decade, they voted for abortion rights. So the toxicity of the federal government so far is not bubbling down to or not dropping down to the state level. And there is room down at the state level to run for office, to go to your town meetings, go to your ward meetings, go to all the places where people's voices can be heard, and really put pressure there. Because at the state level, there certainly are people who are MAGA Republicans at the state level. But at the state level, a lot of legislators just want to legislate for their states, and that will be a backstop against too much authoritarianism at the federal level if we can shore up those states. And it is worth remembering that one of those states is California. California is a very large state. It's the fifth largest economy in the world, not in America, but in the world, and it's going to have a lot of clout. Similarly, Massachusetts, New York, Illinois, those are all states that can really push back on the agenda. So focus on the states and the local level. Okay, so yeah, Ohio's already a mess, but look at Ohio. That's a great. Somebody just said Ohio's already authoritarian. That's true, but Ohio is a freaking mess. The degree to which there could be pushback on DeWine and the whole energy thing. I mean, there's a lot of people who ought to be pissed off about the fact you all in Ohio are paying huge amounts of money for a corrupt deal that put a ton of money in the pockets of the Republicans, the Republican state people. I mean, that's ridiculous. Anyway, that brings me to my final point, and that is, if in fact you are willing to accept the premise that what has really mattered in American politics for a long time now is disinformation and the right-wing ecosystem, then there is something that everybody can do about that. And there's a lot of conversations going on amongst people who were involved in journalism to figure out how they can move forward. But I feel like I ought to point out that you and I, all of you here and I, built what is happening on this Facebook page ourselves. The initial investment of capital was $0. It was me being willing to sit at a counter and type. And I've never advertised. I've never accepted advertising. And there is, this page has more than 2 million followers, and Substack is quite high as well. And there is no reason. I'm not saying everybody should start to write every night. Believe me, I'm just exhausted. Just an aside there. I know people are very worried about me, and you are right to be worried about me in the sense that I was on the road for 13 months, which is a crazy amount of time. Not just talking about the book, that was only a month, but talking about democracy. And I'm just exhausted. I would have been exhausted no matter who got elected. And I'm just paying my bills and trying to get my feet back under me. I will get enough rest under my belt soon. But it's going to take a while to get back in shape and all that. Anyway, all that being said, I am not sure. I mean, I'm not saying that everybody should try and do what I do, because it's nobody wants to put in the kind of hours I'm putting in. But listen, if people are getting their information from social media, use it. It's free. Those of you who are good with memes, those of you who can do cuts of the stuff I say and spread it onto TikTok or to TikTok is where young women get their news, but Reddit, Reddit, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. There is no reason. Somebody posted, well, the Democrats have to start hiring all the bots and trolls that the Republicans do. And I'm like, no, we don't. We have the technology to do this ourselves. I think that perhaps it's a leap for a lot of people to think that they could, in fact, start their own YouTube channel, start their own, starts throwing material in. Memes especially are very effective, but the tools are actually really easy to use. So if you are finding somebody who wants to contribute and don't know how, that's a really easy way to start flooding the zone with good information that is not available in those places otherwise. And I'm going to be doing more on that front as well. I wanted to do more before the election, and I just could not find the time. So going forward, I mean, you can disagree with me, but I really believe, and I'm an idealist, I've said this to you a million times, which means I believe that what changes the world is ideas. If I believe you're my friend, I'm going to act really differently than if I believe you're my enemy. You haven't changed. What has changed is what I believe. And the way you change ideas is you change the information sphere. And we can do that. I have done it. You have done it by circulating the stuff that I write and the stuff that I say. But I don't, it should not be just me. I'm an older woman who has a certain niche. Again, memes, ideas, little videos, all of the things that have been as powerful as they have been in those places. There's no reason that people can't do the same thing. And similarly, putting pressure on all the media to talk about things honestly and to hold them to account. Because if we do that, and if we really manage to take back that information sphere, the reality is that the ideas that the center of America is embracing are popular. People really like them. And the problem was in this election that they thought by electing Donald Trump, they were voting for them, when in fact they were voting for their opposite. And that is, that's something that simply must be addressed, or we're going to be where Russia is, where people think they're voting for their interests, and in fact, they're voting for the interests of Vladimir Putin. Now, that's one more piece that I just want to throw out here that I'm playing with. One of the things that fascinates me, just fascinates me when we're talking about this moment in political history or in American history, is that there is so little discussion of the fact that you've heard me say a million times, now it's higher, but in 2021, we learned that $53 trillion had moved from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1%. Now we have a political event where the richest man in the world backed a candidate, and as soon as that candidate got elected, he made several, like I think it's 42 billion more dollars. And he and a number of other billionaires are absolutely calling the shots. And you don't see that reflected in the way we talk about this moment. And one of the things that authoritarians know is that the way you get a following is you turn people against someone. And one of the things that people like me don't want to do is say, those are the bad people. But in this moment, it's a little weird how little there is in the information sphere about the dangers of the extremely wealthy. Because I think there's this sense that if you don't embrace the very, 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 very rich, you're a communist. But the reality is that, as presidents have said since the beginning, that the American experiment and democracy is at least as much danger from the very wealthy as it has ever been from the very poor. And that's perhaps something that people ought to be thinking about and ought to be spreading talk about going forward. Because I don't know about you, I just find it's bizarre that these young people who can't afford homes are voting for Trump, who is backed by the richest man in the world, in order to get more tax cuts. And that, to me, that's an equation that it seems to me ought to be far more widely known. I just wanted to throw that one out there. All right. I hope that was a little bit cheerful. I think we are all shell-shocked because of all the things that could happen and that we fear are going to happen. But once again, they have not happened yet. And one of the ways to make sure they don't happen is not to assume that they will, and to work to make sure that they don't. And that's up to us, because the minute we stop paying attention is the minute that they feel they can do anything they want. And so we'll see how this one plays out. All right. So, I think that's about all I have to say. I'm sorry, I was just sounding a little vague because Somebody just said we need to teach media literacy to young people. Yeah, but to be honest, young people understand media literacy. The group of people that really went pro-Trump is the group of people just below the baby boomers. And they are absolutely credulous. Somebody wrote to me today to say, you have Trump derangement syndrome. You're still talking about Russia, Russia, Russia. It's like, that's because I read the Senate Intelligence Committee report that was written by Republicans who supported Trump, who said, in fact, the Trump 2016 campaign, 2016, not 2024, the 2016 campaign worked with Russian operatives. Now, if you want to call that Trump derangement syndrome, I suspect that says a lot more about you than it does about me. That's the generation that was really, really vulnerable to not having any idea what was real and what was not. One of the things that is going to come out, I think, on Substack is somebody has just done a study of what Substack newsletters are AI and what are not. And I have not seen the report. They said they would show it to me. They also said that I'm 100% human, which I am. But I'm always a little bit worried because there's so much of my stuff available. It would be pretty easy, I think, for AI to try and replicate me. But they said they were surprised by how much that was available, especially in right-wing blogs, is AI. So maybe, we just learned to label stuff AI. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that this is an information war. It has been for a long time, and we can be soldiers in it if we choose to be. I have felt that I was for a long time, but we all have this. You all have the same tools that I do. And you have different skills than I do, so you can cover a lot of places that I can't. So I hope that's been a little bit cheery, and we'll just see how it plays out, and try and keep the faith, because, I still believe that people are good, and that the most of them, and that they would like to have a government that reflects that. And a lot of people, I think, weren't really sure what they were voting for when they put Trump in office, and we'll see how it plays out. But until then, we'll just keep doing the best we can. All right, I'm gonna go get ready for an event I'm doing tonight. Thank you for being here, and I will see you later.